Hey, tonight we are going to explore the fascinating world of medieval sleep traditions. Imagine a time when darkness fell heavy over stone castles and humble cottages alike, when the boundary between dreams and reality seemed much thinner than today. In those shadowy medieval chambers, people didn't have science to explain their nightmares. They had rituals, herbs, and prayers. They hung dried thistle above their beds, placed amethyst stones under their pillows, and whispered protective charms as candles flickered low. They believed night terrors were visits from demons or messages from beyond. These ancient practices, though born of superstition, carried people through countless nights of uncertainty, offering comfort in their simplicity, structure in their repetition, a gentle armor against the vulnerable state of sleep. If you've been enjoying these historical journeys to sleep, I would be so grateful if you could like this story, share it with someone who might need some gentle rest tonight, and subscribe so we can continue these peaceful explorations together. I'm curious, what time of night is it where you are listening right now? Are you already nestled beneath your blankets, or are you preparing for sleep? Now dim your lights, settle into your most comfortable position, and let the modern world fade away. Allow your breathing to slow as we journey back through the mists of time, to an age when dreamscapes were navigated not with science, but with tradition, faith, and curious folk wisdom passed down through generations. In a small village nestled between ancient woodlands and rolling meadows, where morning mist clung to thatched roofs like gentle memories, lived a community of people for whom sleep was both necessity and mystery. The year was 1382, and the medieval world operated according to rhythms now lost to time. The day began and ended with the sun. Markets bustled on holy days, and the spaces between waking and dreaming were populated with rituals as practical to medieval minds as our bedtime routines are to us. Eleanor the herbwoman lived in a stone cottage on the village edge, where rosemary and lavender nodded in the breeze, their scent carrying promises of tranquil sleep. Her windows were small, but caught enough light to illuminate the bundles of dried herbs hanging from oak beams overhead. Her reputation for crafting sleep aids had spread through surrounding villages, bringing travelers to her door when nightmares plagued their households. On this particular autumn morning, as golden light filtered through her eastern window, Eleanor crushed dried herbs with a pestle. The gentle, rhythmic sound filled her cottage. Thyme, chamomile, and a precious pinch of imported saffron, rare and expensive but essential for her most effective sleep sachet. The mortar was smooth stone, worn from decades of similar motions, performed by her mother and grandmother before her. A knock at her door paused her work. Eleanor brushed herb dust from her hands onto her apron and opened the door to find Thomas the miller standing there, his cap clutched in work-roughened hands. His eyes showed weariness that spoke of troubled nights. "Mistress Eleanor," he said, voice low as though sharing a secret. "My daughter Agnes hasn't slept properly in a fortnight. She wakes screaming about a black dog that sits upon her chest." Eleanor nodded knowingly. The nightmare creature that stole breath was well known to her. What modern people would one day call sleep paralysis, medieval folk called the night hag, or sometimes, as in Agnes's vision, a spectral black dog. "How old is the child?" Eleanor asked, already reaching for different bundles of herbs. 12 summers, Thomas replied, watching her movements with hope. Eleanor selected lavender, valerian root, and a small pouch of dried hawthorn berries. With practiced hands, she bound them together with linen thread, creating a small sachet that released a soothing fragrance when gently squeezed. Place this beneath her pillow, Eleanor instructed, handing him the small bundle. And before she retires, warm some milk with honey and a small grating of nutmeg. Not too much, just enough to dust the surface. The taste should be pleasant, not bitter. Thomas reached for his coin purse, but Eleanor shook her head. Bring me some of your flour when the mill runs next. That will be payment enough. After Thomas departed, Eleanor returned to her work, preparing remedies for other villagers. By midday, she had finished several sachets and 2 bottles of sleep tincture made with valerian and passion flower steeped in strong ale. Medieval people believed that certain herbs contained properties that warded off evil spirits, drawing them away from bedchambers like moths diverted from precious clothing. As afternoon shadows lengthened across her garden, Eleanor gathered fresh sprigs of rosemary. Unlike modern understanding of herbs as mild sedatives, medieval herbwomen like Eleanor knew rosemary as a protective plant that guarded against harmful nighttime visitations. She would add these fresh sprigs to the small pouch she was preparing for Margaret, the baker's wife, who had complained of dreams in which she felt herself drowning in dark water. The medieval understanding of dreams was complex, blending Christian theology with folk beliefs that predated the church. Dreams could be divine messages, demonic temptations, or reflections of bodily imbalances. Nightmares in particular were often attributed to demons or night spirits that needed to be warded off with protective charms and prayers. As the sun began its descent, Eleanor visited the village priest, Father Michael, whose small church stood at the village centre, its modest steeple reaching toward heaven like a hopeful prayer. Inside, the cool stone interior held the scent of beeswax candles and ancient wood. Father Michael was lighting candles for evening prayer when Eleanor entered. "Ah, Eleanor," he greeted her, his voice echoing slightly in the empty church. "Have you come for the blessed salt?" She nodded, approaching the altar where he worked. "I've had 3 requests this week for nightmare protection. The changing season always brings troubled sleep." Father Michael nodded sympathetically. Unlike some of his more rigid colleagues in larger towns, he understood that his parishioners blended Christian practice with older traditions. The church had long since learned to incorporate some folk practices rather than futilely attempting to eliminate them. From a small silver box, Father Michael shook white salt crystals into a clean cloth Eleanor offered. Blessed salt was sprinkled in the corners of bedchambers or around beds to create a protective boundary against evil influences. This practice, officially sanctioned by the church, complemented Eleanor's herbal remedies, creating a harmony between ecclesiastical and natural approaches to nightmare prevention. "I've also brought you this," Eleanor said, offering him a small clay pot of salve. "For your joints when the cold nights make them ache." Father Michael accepted with a grateful nod. "God works through your hands and knowledge of his herbs, Eleanor. The bishop may frown, but I see only good in healing work such as yours." As Eleanor left the church, the village was preparing for evening. Women called children in from play, men returned from fields or workshops, and smoke rose from cooking fires. Medieval sleep practices began long before bedtime. The evening meal would be lighter than midday fare. Heavy food before bed was believed to cause disturbing dreams as the body struggled to digest while at rest. Eleanor stopped at the home of Widow Matilda, whose cottage stood beside the village green. Unlike most villagers who shared their sleeping spaces with family members, Matilda lived alone since her husband's death 3 winters past. Solitary sleep was rare and sometimes feared in medieval times. Having others nearby provided both practical safety and spiritual comfort during the vulnerable hours of darkness. "I've brought you something for peaceful dreams," Eleanor said, handing Matilda a small wooden amulet carved with protective symbols. "Wear it at night, touching your skin." Matilda's face brightened as she examined the amulet. "Did John the carpenter make this?" Eleanor nodded. "He carved it while reciting Psalm 91. The psalm, known as the Protector's Prayer, was believed particularly effective against night terrors. The combination of sacred words spoken during the object's creation imbued it with protective power that would remain active while worn. This merger of craftsmanship and prayer represented the medieval world's seamless blend of practical skill and spiritual practice. As twilight deepened into evening, Eleanor made her way home, passing cottages where families were engaging in their own bedtime rituals. Through open shutters, she glimpsed mothers sprinkling holy water in bedroom corners while murmuring prayers, fathers checking that iron tools were properly placed near beds, iron being known to repel supernatural beings, and children being tucked beneath woolen blankets as stories were told to guide their thoughts toward pleasant dreams. Medieval people slept differently than we do today. Rather than 8 continuous hours, they often practiced segmented sleep, retiring shortly after sunset for first sleep, waking for an hour or two around midnight, then returning to second sleep until dawn. This midnight waking was not considered insomnia, but a natural time for prayer, quiet conversation, or even visiting neighbors. It was also when those suffering from nightmares were most vulnerable, having experienced terrifying dreams during first sleep. Arriving home, Eleanor prepared her own cottage for night. She placed a small iron knife beneath her sleeping pallet, not for physical protection, but because iron's properties were known to disperse negative energies. She sprinkled some of Father Michael's blessed salt in her doorway and hung a sprig of St. John's wort beside her bed, its yellow flowers dried, but still retaining their potency against dark dreams. As she stirred her small fire, ensuring it would burn safely through the night, Eleanor reflected on the many ways her community protected their sleep. Wealthy nobles in distant castles might sleep with precious stones believed to influence dreams. Amethyst for tranquility, jade for balance, moonstone for peaceful visions. They might commission expensive tapestries depicting saints or biblical scenes to hang near their beds, creating a visual shield against nightmare spirits. But here in the village, simpler methods prevailed. A father might place his shoes pointing away from the bed, confusing evil spirits about which direction to approach the sleeper. A mother might comb her daughter's hair exactly 3 times before bed while reciting a protective rhyme passed down through generations. Children might be given a slice of bread that had been passed through church bells during their blessing, believed to provide a night of safe dreaming when eaten before sleep. Eleanor prepared her own sleep tonic, warm ale with honey and crushed chamomile flowers, and sipped it slowly while saying her evening prayers. Though she provided remedies for others' nightmares, she herself occasionally suffered from disturbing dreams. Tonight, she would place a small bundle of dried thistle beneath her pillow, its spiky form believed capable of catching and holding nightmares before they could reach the sleeper's mind. As she settled onto her straw mattress, covered with clean linen and warm wool blankets, Eleanor gazed through her small window at the night sky. Stars glittered like distant candles, reminding her of the church's teaching that angels watched over sleeping souls. This comforting thought accompanied her as she drifted towards sleep. While Eleanor slept peacefully that night, across the village, young Agnes was experiencing the benefit of her herbal sachet. For the first night in many, the spectral black dog did not appear in her dreams to crush her chest and steal her breath. Instead, she dreamed of summer meadows and gentle streams, her mind guided by the subtle influence of lavender and valerian tucked beneath her pillow. In the manor house overlooking the village, Lord Geoffrey had his own methods for ensuring peaceful sleep. As a nobleman who had fought in campaigns in distant lands, he had seen horrors that visited him in nightmares. His chamber reflected his status, a large bed with carved posts and embroidered curtains that could be drawn to create a protective cocoon around the sleeper. But even with these luxuries, he relied on methods not so different from those used by his peasants. Lord Geoffrey's personal chaplain had inscribed protective prayers on parchment that were folded and sewn into his pillowcase, a silver reliquary containing a saint's finger bone hung from his bedpost. And before retiring, he always drank wine that had been blessed and infused with imported spices believed to promote restful sleep, cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom brought, at great expense from eastern lands. His wife, Lady Isabel, preferred different methods. In her youth, a wise woman had taught her to visualize a white light surrounding her bed before sleep, creating a barrier through which no harm could pass. She also kept a small bowl of clear water beside her bed, as water was believed to trap negative energies that might otherwise enter dreams. Each morning, she would dispose of this water by throwing it toward the west, the direction associated with endings and departure. Medieval people across all social classes shared a common belief that the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thinner during sleep. This made protection necessary, but also created opportunities for special dreams, those containing divine guidance or prophetic visions. Such dreams were particularly anticipated on certain holy days, or after specific religious observances, when the dreamer's soul was considered most receptive to heavenly messages. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with dew sparkling on the village green. Eleanor rose with the sun, said her morning prayers, and began preparing for the day's work. She had just begun grinding dried valerian root when a knock came at her door. It was Thomas the miller, his face transformed by a night of unbroken sleep. "Mistress Eleanor," he began, his voice thick with gratitude. "Agnes slept through the night without crying out. This morning she said she dreamed of her mother." His wife had passed 2 winters ago, making his daughter's peaceful dream of her especially meaningful. Eleanor smiled, pleased but not surprised. The herbs guided her dreams away from darkness. Make certain she continues with the remedy for 7 nights. The mind forms habits in sleep, just as in waking life. After Thomas departed, Eleanor continued her morning routine. She would visit several households today, checking on those for whom she had provided remedies and gathering reports of their dreams. These accounts would help her refine her methods, adjusting herb mixtures or recommending different protective measures based on the results. At midday, Eleanor visited the home of Joanna the Weaver, whose 3 children had been experiencing similar nightmares. Dreams of being lost in a forest where trees had faces that whispered frightening words. This pattern of shared nightmares was common in medieval households, where stories were told around evening fires and fears spread between family members sleeping in close proximity. Eleanor had provided Joanna with small sachets of dried hops and chamomile for each child, along with instructions to place a bowl of milk outside their door at night, an offering to placate any wandering spirits that might otherwise disturb the children's dreams. She had also suggested hanging a circular wreath of braided grass above their sleeping pallets, the unbroken circle creating a symbolic boundary against intrusions. They slept better, Joanna reported as she continued working at her loom, the rhythmic clacking providing background to their conversation. Though Martin still woke once, he said the forest in his dream had a path now, and he wasn't afraid to follow it. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Dreams that transformed from frightening to manageable often indicated that a remedy was working, but needed more time. The subconscious mind adapted gradually, incorporating protective elements into dream narratives as symbols of emerging safety. Continue with the sachets, Eleanor advised, and tonight, sing to them as they fall asleep. The hymn to St. Michael is particularly powerful for guiding dreams toward light rather than darkness. As Eleanor continued her rounds through the village, she passed the blacksmith's forge, where John was hammering an iron horseshoe. The rhythmic clanging filled the air with sound that seemed to push away the possibility of bad luck or ill fortune. Among the many sleep protections used in medieval times, iron horseshoes were particularly esteemed, often nailed above doors or windows to prevent the entry of malevolent forces that might later affect dreams. "Eleanor," John called out when he noticed her passing. "Will you tell me if that amulet brings Widow Matilda peaceful sleep? I put special care into the carving." "I'll inquire when I see her tomorrow," Eleanor promised. She understood the pride. Craftsmen took in objects made for protective purposes. Such items were not merely physical goods, but carriers of intention and faith. Their effectiveness linked to the mindfulness with which they were created. By late afternoon, Eleanor had nearly completed her rounds. Her last visit was to the cottage of Robert the candlemaker, whose wife Alice had been experiencing dreams in which she felt she was burning. Such dreams were particularly troubling in a medieval context, where fire posed a constant threat to thatched homes and where spiritual interpretations might suggest purgatorial symbolism. Alice greeted Eleanor with obvious relief. "The dream changed last night," she reported as they sat at her small table. "I still saw fire, but it was contained in a hearth, warming rather than threatening." Eleanor nodded, pleased with this transformation. She had provided Alice with a small pouch containing dried rose petals and thyme to be placed in her sleeping cap, along with instructions to place her shoes in a crossed position under the bed, an arrangement believed to confuse harmful spirits and prevent them from approaching. The sleeper. Dreams of transformation often indicate healing, Eleanor explained. Continue with the remedies, and each night before sleep, picture yourself surrounded by cool, clear water. The mind can learn new paths through dreams, just as feet can learn new paths through the forest. As evening approached once more, Eleanor returned home with a basket of fresh herbs gathered from the edges of the village common and offerings received in payment: a small loaf of bread, 2 fresh eggs, a length of new linen. The medieval economy operated largely through such exchanges, particularly for services related to health and well-being. In her cottage, Eleanor began preparing a special sleep remedy for the coming winter months. Cold, dark days affected people's dreams, often bringing heavier, more oppressive nightmares as the natural world appeared to die around them. Winter remedies required careful preparation and the addition of warming elements: cinnamon, ginger, and tiny amounts of precious saffron for those who could afford it. As she worked, Eleanor reflected on the many ways her community moved between wakefulness and sleep each day, and how the boundaries of that transition were carefully maintained through rituals of protection. Some methods were simple physical preparations, clearing ashes from the hearth to prevent dream spirits from using them to form bodies, sweeping threshold dust away from rather than toward the home to direct negative influences outward, placing a knife beneath a birthing mother's pillow to cut the pain of labor from entering her dreams. Other methods incorporated religious elements, reciting specific psalms before bed, making the sign of the cross over pillows, keeping blessed candle, stubs near sleeping areas to be lit during frightening dreams. These practices reflected the medieval mind's understanding of sleep as both physical necessity and spiritual journey, a time when the soul might wander while the body rested. Eleanor finished her preparations as twilight gathered once more. She set aside bundles for tomorrow's rounds and prepared her own evening rituals. Tonight, she would try a different protection method, placing a small mirror facing away from her bed to reflect any negative energies back toward their source. This technique, learned from her grandmother, was especially useful during the waning moon phase when dreams were believed to be more susceptible to outside influence. After a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apple, Eleanor sat by her fire and said her evening prayers. The rhythm of prayer formed another layer of protection, aligning her thoughts with divine order before entering the unpredictable realm of dreams. She drank her sleep tonic of warm ale, honey, and herbs, and arranged her sleeping space with careful attention to protective details, the placement of her pillow, the arrangement of her blankets, the position of the small wooden cross hanging on her wall. Across the village, dozens of similar rituals were being performed in cottages, manors, and the small monastery beyond the northern fields. Some people recited charms passed down through generations, others sang quietly or told specific stories believed to guide dreams toward pleasant paths. Children were taught simple rhymes to repeat if frightening dreams began, words that would bring them back to safer dream territories, or even wake them if danger seemed too great. In the monastery, monks practiced their own methods of dream guidance, focusing on prayers and meditations that directed the mind toward divine contemplation. Before retiring to their simple beds, they might read specific biblical passages or contemplate religious images painted on workshop walls. Some monks practiced dream incubation, requesting specific guidance through dreams by focused prayer before sleep, a practice that originated in pre-Christian times but had been adapted for Christian purposes. As darkness settled fully over the village, most inhabitants completed their preparations for the vulnerable hours ahead. Final prayers were said, protective objects checked and adjusted, doors secured with both physical latches and spiritual safeguards such as blessed herbs tucked into cracks or crosses carved into wooden surfaces. Eleanor extinguished her candle, but left her small fire burning low, its light considered a natural protection against entities that preferred complete darkness. She settled onto her mattress, arranged her blankets, and closed her eyes. Like generations before her, she had done everything possible to ensure peaceful dreams, creating multiple layers of protection through physical objects, prayers, visualizations, and herbs. As she drifted towards sleep, Eleanor's last thoughts were of her community. Thomas's daughter sleeping peacefully with lavender beneath her pillow, Widow Matilda with her protective amulet, the miller's children with their circular grass wreath, Lord Geoffrey with his blessed wine and reliquary, and dozens of others, each wrapped in layers of protection created through centuries of observation, faith, and the collective wisdom of ancestors who had navigated the mysterious realm of dreams before them. In this medieval world, nightmares were not merely unpleasant experiences to be endured, but spiritual encounters to be actively prevented. The methods might seem superstitious to modern minds, but they provided medieval people with a sense of agency during sleep, a time when consciousness receded and vulnerability increased. These practices offered not only potential physical effects through herbs with mild sedative properties, but also powerful psychological comfort through rituals that prepared the mind for peaceful rest. Night deepened over the village, stars wheeled overhead, and in cottages and manor houses alike, medieval people slept beneath their various protections. their dreams guided by herbs, prayers, and ancient wisdom passed down through countless generations, each adding their own observations to the collective knowledge of how best to navigate the mysterious landscape of dreams. As this chapter closes its eyes, another tale begins to stir in the shadows of medieval memory. A story of moonlit gardens where night-blooming flowers release their secrets, of ancient towers where dream catchers spin their silent magic, of silent monasteries where monks map the geography of visions. Let us drift there together, carried on the gentle current of history's quiet stream. Between twilight and dawn, when shadows grew long across stone floors and medieval minds drifted towards sleep, there walked the dream keepers, mysterious figures who held the secrets of peaceful slumber. Their gentle wisdom passed through generations like threads of silver moonlight, safeguarded villages against the dark creatures of night terrors. In the peaceful hamlet of Willowshire, nestled between rolling hills and ancient forests that had stood since before William the Conqueror claimed England's throne, the art of dreamkeeping was held in particularly high regard. The year was 1328, and while many villages had embraced Christianity's teachings about nightmares being messages from heaven or hell, Willowshire maintained older traditions, quiet practices that blended pagan wisdom with Christian prayer in the practical manner of country folk who needed their sleep to face tomorrow's labours. Agnes Fletcher was the village's most respected dreamkeeper, though few would use such a title openly. To her neighbours, she was simply a wise woman, a midwife, a keeper of herb gardens and ancient knowledge. Her cottage stood at the edge of the settlement, its thatched roof collecting the evening mist like a crown of silver, the small windows glowing with candlelight long after other homes had fallen into darkness. The interior of Agnes's cottage was a place of gentle wonder. Bundles of dried herbs hanging from rough-hewn ceiling beams, their scents mingling in the air. Lavender for peace, chamomile for gentle dreams, valerian for the deeply troubled sleeper. Small cloth pouches filled with curious contents lined her shelves alongside clay jars, containing remedies whose recipes had never been written down, but passed from grandmother to mother to daughter through countless generations. On this particular autumn evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the forest leaves in shades of amber and gold, young Thomas, the blacksmith's son, arrived at Agnes's door. His eyes were ringed with shadows that spoke of many restless nights, his normally steady hands trembling slightly as he knocked. "Come in, child," Agnes called softly, before his knuckles had even touched the wood a second time. Years of practice had taught her to recognize the particular shuffling gait of the sleep-deprived, the hesitant approach of those haunted by night terrors. Thomas ducked his head as he entered the low doorway, the smell of wood smoke and herbs enveloping him. "Mistress Agnes," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I haven't slept properly in a fortnight. The nightmares, they come each night now." Agnes nodded slowly, her weathered hands continuing their work of grinding dried rosemary in a stone mortar. She didn't ask Thomas to describe his nightmares. Dreams were delicate things, and speaking of bad ones in the hours before sleep was thought to invite them back with greater strength. Instead, she gestured for the young man to sit on the three-legged stool near her hearth. "Your wedding is approaching," she observed quietly, noticing how Thomas's fingers traced the newly calloused patterns on his palms, the result of extra work in his father's forge, preparing for his new life with the miller's daughter. "Yes," Thomas admitted, "in 2 weeks' time." "And with it, new responsibilities," Agnes said, not needing to elaborate further. They both understood that fear often appeared in sleep when one's waking life was changing. She set aside her mortar and pestle, moving to a wooden chest tucked beneath her window. From it, she withdrew a small bundle wrapped in undyed linen. With practiced movements, Agnes unwrapped the cloth to reveal an oddly carved piece of hawthorn wood, no larger than a man's thumb. The wood was dark with age, polished smooth by generations of hands. Tiny symbols had been etched into its surface, spirals and lines that predated the stone church at the village centre. This, Agnes explained softly, as she placed it in Thomas's palm, must be kept beneath your pillow for 7 nights. Not 6, not 8, but 7 precisely. Each evening before you rest, hold it in your right hand and speak your true name 3 times. Then place it where I've instructed. Thomas studied the object with a mixture of reverence and uncertainty. My true name? Not Thomas? Agnes smiled, gently. The name your heart knows you by, child. The one that feels most honest when whispered to yourself alone. The young man nodded slowly, wrapping the charm carefully. And will this keep the nightmares away? It will remind your sleeping mind that you are anchored to this world. Agnes replied. Nightmares gain their power when we feel adrift. As Thomas departed, clutching the hawthorn charm as though it were made of precious metal rather than simple wood, Agnes returned to her work. Her methods were not the only ones practiced throughout the medieval countryside. Each region had developed its own traditions for safeguarding sleep, blending folklore, Christian doctrine, and practical observation in ways that modern minds might find curious, but which provided genuine comfort to those who believed. In the neighbouring village of Elmbrook, Master Walter the carpenter employed an entirely different approach to nightmare prevention. Walter's tools of choice were hammer, chisel, and a profound knowledge of protective symbols. For a modest fee of eggs, cheese, or occasionally a chicken, Walter would carve elaborate patterns into the wooden bedposts of troubled sleepers. His most commonly requested design was what villagers called the endless knot, an intricate, interwoven pattern with no beginning and no end. Walter would explain to his customers, in his slow, methodical way, that nightmares travelled along straight lines. They could not navigate the twisting paths of the knots, becoming trapped within the wood, rather than finding their way to the sleeper's mind. These carved bedposts could be found in nearly every home in Elmbrook, from the humble cot of the shepherd's hut to the larger box bed in the Reeves house. Walter's own bed featured his finest work, bedposts so elaborately carved that not even the most persistent nightmare could possibly find its way through the maze of patterns to disturb his slumber. Further still from Willowshire, in the more prosperous market town of Kingsbridge, those with means sought protection from nightmares through more ecclesiastical methods. The local abbey, St. Michael's, offered special night prayers for those who could afford the donations required. The brothers maintained that nightmares were either divine warnings or demonic influences, both requiring spiritual intervention. Brother Ambrose specialized in this ministry, providing troubled sleepers with small vellum scrolls containing prayers to be recited just before sleep. These prayers invoked the protection of angels, particularly St. Michael himself, warrior against darkness, to stand guard over the sleeper's mind and soul during vulnerable nighttime hours. For the wealthiest merchants and landowners, Brother Ambrose offered an even more potent remedy. Tiny reliquaries containing what he claimed were threads from St. Michael's cloak or splinters from his lance. These precious items, enclosed in silver or occasionally gold pendants, were to be worn around the neck during sleep, their holy presence believed to repel the demons that brought nightmares. The abbey's approach differed significantly from Agnes's quiet hedge wisdom or Walter's craftsman's solution. but all three served the same essential purpose: providing comfort and a sense of protection to those who struggled with night terrors in an age where darkness was absolute once the candles were extinguished. Back in her cottage, Agnes prepared for her evening duties. Unlike the brothers at St. Michael's or even Walter with his carvings, Agnes sometimes made house calls, visiting those whose nightmares were too severe for simple charms or who were too ill to travel to her dwelling. Tonight, she would visit old Martha, the widow whose cottage stood near the village pond. Martha had been experiencing particularly troubling dreams since the harvest festival. Dreams filled with premonitions of flood and famine that left her gasping for breath in the dark hours of night. Agnes gathered her supplies, dried herbs bundled, with red thread, small stones collected from the crossing of 3 streams, beeswax candles infused with aromatics, and a small vial of her most precious substance, dream honey. This rare honey, harvested only on Midsummer's Eve from hives placed near the ancient standing stone beyond the village boundary, was said to bring only the sweetest dreams when a tiny drop was placed on the tongue before sleep. With her basket over her arm, Agnes set out along the twilight path to Martha's cottage. Villagers nodded respectfully as she passed, some making subtle gestures of greeting that outsiders might not recognize. A finger touched to the forehead, a slight inclination of the head. These were acknowledgements of Agnes's role as dreamkeeper, gestures as old as the village itself. Children were being ushered indoors as she walked, their mothers reciting the night chants that had been part of bedtime ritual since time immemorial. Sleep tight, sleep light, no dreams of fright. Morning comes with golden light. Simple rhymes, yet powerful in their continuity through generations, creating a sense of safety and routine that itself helped ward off nightmares. When Agnes arrived at Martha's cottage, she found the elderly woman sitting beside her small hearth, gnarled hands, clutching a wooden cup of watered ale, eyes fixed on the dancing flames as though they might contain answers to her troubled sleep. "Good evening, Martha," Agnes greeted softly, setting her basket on the rough-hewn table. Martha looked up, relief washing over her time-worn features. "Agnes, thank the saints you've come." "Tell me," Agnes said as she began unpacking her supplies, "have you been hearing the owl that nests in the bell tower?" Martha seemed surprised by the question. "Yes, these past 3 nights. How did you know?" Agnes nodded knowingly. Barn owls carry dreams on their wings, some good, some troubling. When they nest near human dwellings, especially holy places like the church, they sometimes bring unusual visions. This explanation, blending natural observation with folklore, visibly comforted Martha. There was logic to her suffering, a cause that could be addressed. Agnes proceeded to hang small bundles of herbs in Martha's sleeping area, rosemary near the window to prevent harmful influences from entering, lavender above the bed to promote peaceful thoughts. From her basket, Agnes produced a small clay, cup and a vessel of warm milk she had brought. To this, she added a spoonful of the precious dream honey, stirring it 3 times clockwise with a hawthorn twig, while murmuring words too soft for Martha to hear clearly. "Drink this slowly," she instructed, handing the cup to Martha. "As you do, think of the stream that runs behind the mill, how it flows smoothly over the stones, never stopping, always finding its path." Martha sipped obediently, her expression softening as the sweetness of the honey spread across her tongue. Agnes then took 3 of the specially gathered stones from her basket and placed them in a small triangle beneath Martha's straw mattress, 1 at the head and 2 at the shoulders, forming what the old people called the guardian's triangle. "Tonight, before you close your eyes, Agnes instructed. Say the names of those you have loved, who now sleep in the churchyard. Say them with gratitude, not sorrow. They watch over your dreams from beyond the veil. As Agnes worked, she explained each element of her practice to Martha, not as strange magic, but as practical wisdom. The honey would remind her body of summer's sweetness, even as winter approached. The stones, cold and solid beneath her bed, would ground her dreams to earth rather than allowing them to drift toward darker realms. The herbs would cleanse the air she breathed during sleep. This transparent approach was characteristic of Agnes's method. Unlike some who practice similar arts, she believed that understanding brought more comfort than mystery. The rituals worked better, she had observed, when the sleeper participated with knowledge rather than blind faith. Before departing, Agnes left Martha with one final instruction. When you wake tomorrow, whether from peaceful sleep or troubled dreams, go directly to the pond's edge and wash your face in its waters before speaking to another soul. The first light of day reflected on water will reset your dreaming mind. As Agnes made her way back through the darkening village, she reflected on the multitude of methods medieval people employed to avoid nightmares. Some, like her own practices, were based on centuries of observation about which herbs produced calming effects or which rituals provided psychological comfort. Others were more fanciful, like the belief that sleeping with a silver coin under one's tongue would prevent the nightmare spirit from entering through the mouth, a practice favored in the eastern villages despite the obvious choking hazard it presented. Some methods seemed entirely supernatural to modern thinking, while others contained wisdom that contemporary medicine would eventually validate. The lavender Agnes hung above beds did indeed promote relaxation through its gentle aroma. The ritual of drinking warm milk with honey before bed provided both nutrition and a gentle rise in blood sugar that helped prevent the body's panic response during sleep. Even practices that seem purely superstitious often contained practical elements. Sleeping with one's stockings inside out, a common recommendation for children with nightmares, meant taking a moment before bed to consciously prepare for sleep, creating a mental break between daytime concerns and nighttime rest. Agnes also knew of regional variations in nightmare prevention. In coastal villages, people placed fish bones in specific patterns beneath their beds, believing the sharp edges would catch and tear the misty forms of night terrors as they tried to rise through the floorboards. Mountain communities favored certain rocks with natural holes through their centers, hanging these hagstones above beds to trap evil spirits who would become confused by the opening and be unable to pass through to the sleeper. Some families kept a bowl of clean water beside the bed, as nightmares, like most malevolent spirits, were believed to be compulsively drawn to examine their reflection. By the time the nightmare finished gazing at itself, morning would come, and its power would dissolve with the dawn's light. Agnes had even heard tales from travelers about distant lands where people built elaborate nightmare traps, resembling small wooden cages decorated with colorful threads. These were placed at the foot of the bed to capture bad dreams before they could reach the sleeper's head. As diverse as these practices were, Agnes observed they shared common elements. They established routine, created a sense of protection, and gave the sleeper a feeling of control over the otherwise uncontrollable realm of dreams. Perhaps, she sometimes thought, that was their true power. Not the herbs or stones or prayers themselves, but the comfort they provided to troubled minds. By the time Agnes returned to her own cottage, night had fully embraced the village. She tended to her hearth, banking the fire to provide gentle warmth until morning. Outside her window, an owl called, perhaps the very same one nesting in the church tower, carrying dreams on its silent wings. Agnes prepared for her own rest, using the same methods she offered others. She placed dried hops and chamomile in a small sachet beneath her pillow, the herbs releasing their subtle scent throughout the night. She washed her hands and face in water infused with rose petals, believing that pleasant scents attracted pleasant dreams. Above her bed hung a wreath of interwoven willow branches, a dream catcher of sorts, though she would never use that name, which belonged to people from lands far beyond her knowledge. As she settled onto her straw mattress, covered with clean linen and woolen blankets against the autumn chill, Agnes performed one final ritual unique to dreamkeepers. She held a smooth riverstone in each hand, closed her eyes, and mentally traveled the boundaries of her village, leaving protective thoughts at each dwelling where children slept. This practice, taught to her by the previous village dreamkeeper, was said to create an invisible web of safety over the entire community. Elsewhere in the medieval world, dream theories were being documented by scholars and physicians with more formal education than Agnes possessed. In monastery libraries and nascent universities, learned men debated whether nightmares originated from physical causes, like indigestion, or spiritual ones like demonic visitation. Physicians following the traditions of Hippocrates and Galen might prescribe dietary adjustments to prevent nightmares, avoiding heavy meats before bedtime, limiting wine consumption, or recommending specific combinations of foods thought to balance the four humors during sleep. These medical approaches existed alongside folk remedies, sometimes complementing them, sometimes competing with them for the trust of those afflicted with bad dreams. In the chambers of nobility, where education blended with superstition as readily as in peasant cottages, elaborate nightmare prevention rituals might include servants checking beneath beds for hidden threats, special prayers recited by private chaplains, or expensive amulets obtained from far-off lands. Noble bedchambers often featured beds partially enclosed by curtains, a practice that served not only to retain warmth, but also to create a protective barrier against wandering spirits. Some wealthy households employed specialized servants whose sole nighttime duty was to sit beside sleeping family members, maintaining a vigil against both physical intruders and spiritual ones. These watchers would sometimes softly sing or hum particular melodies believed to repel bad dreams while attracting good ones, an early form of the lullaby tradition still practiced today. The changing seasons brought different nightmare concerns. Winter, with its long darkness and forced confinement indoors, was considered particularly dangerous for troubled sleep. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, required special protections. Many villages practiced communal rituals on this night, keeping fires burning until dawn, and engaging in all-night storytelling specifically designed to guide collective dreams toward pleasant paths. Spring brought its own challenges, as the exuberance of renewed plant growth was thought to affect dreams as well, making them more vivid and potentially more disturbing. Summer's heat could lead to fitful sleep that left one vulnerable to nightmare intrusions, while autumn, with its visible dying of the natural world, stirred subconscious fears of mortality that might manifest in dreams. Throughout the year, the phases of the moon were carefully observed for their influence on sleep quality. The full moon was widely believed to intensify all dreams, both good and bad. Many nightmare prevention practices were adjusted according to lunar phases, with stronger protections implemented during the full moon and gentler ones during the waning periods. Children, considered especially vulnerable to nightmare spirits, due to their innocent and malleable souls, received particular attention in medieval nightmare prevention. Beyond the common protective charms and herbal remedies, they were often taught specific prayers or counting games to focus their minds away from frightening thoughts before sleep. Some parents placed symbolic objects of protection in their children's sleeping areas. A father's knife beneath a son's bed, or a mother's embroidery hoop near a daughter's pillow were common practices, thought to extend parental protection into the dream realm. As dawn approached, Agnes woke briefly, as was her habit. The hour between first light and true sunrise was considered potent for dream work. She took this time to reflect on her own dreams, which for dreamkeepers were believed to sometimes contain messages for the community. This morning, her dreams had been peaceful. Visions of ripening apples and geese flying southward. Normal, seasonal images that suggested no particular warnings were needed. She rose, washed her face in collected dew water, as was her morning ritual, and began preparing for a new day of tending to her garden, mixing remedies and listening to the dreams of villagers who might seek her counsel. The boundaries between her role as dreamkeeper and her more openly acknowledged position as herbalist were intentionally blurred. Many of the same plants served both purposes, and in the cautious world of medieval healthcare, such ambiguity provided safety. Later that morning, Thomas the blacksmith's son appeared again at her door, his face transformed by a night of proper rest. "It worked," he said simply, his voice carrying the wonder of someone who had forgotten what peaceful sleep felt like. Agnes nodded, accepting his gratitude without surprise. "Remember to continue for the full 7 nights," she reminded him gently. "I will," Thomas promised. "But I was wondering—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Could I request something similar for Catherine? My bride-to-be has mentioned troubled sleep as well, though she's too shy to come herself." Agnes considered this request carefully. Dream remedies were ideally personalized, based on the specific nature of the individual and their nightmares. However, she understood the young man's concern for his future wife. "Bring me one of her hair ribbons," Agnes finally instructed, "one she has worn recently, and ask her, without writing it down, what color she most often sees in her dreams. Remember her answer exactly." Thomas departed with this mission, and Agnes returned to grinding dried herbs for a poultice needed by the cooper's wife for her rheumatic shoulder. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to the broader tapestry of medieval sleep beliefs, how communities across lands and cultures had developed their own methods for navigating the mysterious landscape of dreams. Some of these methods had traveled with merchants and pilgrims, creating fascinating hybrids of practice. Agnes herself had learned the use of dream honey from a traveling peddler who claimed to have acquired the knowledge in Byzantine lands, while her use of river stones came from older local traditions, predating even the Romans' brief occupation of Britain. By midday, Agnes had visitors from a farm beyond the village boundary, a mother concerned about her 4-year-old son who woke screaming each night. Agnes listened carefully to the mother's description of the child's behavior, noting when the nightmares had begun, after seeing a dead fox on the road, and any patterns to their occurrence. For this child, Agnes recommended a different approach than her usual remedies. She gave the mother a small wooden cup painted with bright colors and instructed her to help the boy collect good dreams during his waking hours. Pretty stones, feathers, or leaves that caught his attention could be placed in the cup beside his sleeping place. Each night, he was to touch one object and remember where he had found it before closing his eyes. Children's nightmares often come from feeling powerless, Agnes explained. This gives him a tool of his own making. As the mother and child left, Agnes caught sight of Brother Matthias from the parish church walking toward her cottage. These visits were not uncommon, but always required careful navigation, The official position of the Church toward practices like Agnes's fell somewhere between tolerant oversight and suspicious scrutiny, depending largely on the individual priest's temperament. Brother Matthias, fortunately, was a practical man who had come to recognize that Agnes's herbs often succeeded where his prayers alone did not. Their unspoken arrangement allowed him to maintain doctrinal disapproval of superstitious practices, while occasionally sending parishioners her way when their ailments, including persistent nightmares, proved resistant to purely spiritual interventions. "Good day, Mistress Agnes," he greeted formally, stopping at a respectful distance from her door. "And to you, brother. How may I serve?" Agnes replied with equal formality. The monk seemed troubled, shifting his weight from one foot to another before speaking. "I find myself unable to achieve proper rest," he finally admitted. "My dreams are disturbing, full of doubt and strange visions that leave me unrested for morning prayers." Agnes recognized the difficulty this request presented for the monk. Coming to her was an acknowledgement that his spiritual methods had proven insufficient. Rather than drawing attention to this awkward reality, she responded practically. "Perhaps your body is speaking to you of some imbalance," she suggested, using language that carefully avoided any implication of spiritual causes. The mind cannot rest properly when the physical humors are disturbed. Brother Matthias seized this explanation gratefully. "Yes, exactly. A physical imbalance affecting my sleep. Have you any remedies for such a condition?" Agnes invited him to sit while she prepared a blend of herbs that would be acceptable within monastery walls. Nothing exotic or suspicious, just simple plants mentioned in monastery medicinal texts. Lemon balm for calming the mind, mint to aid digestion, and chamomile for promoting gentle sleep. As she worked, she offered advice disguised as casual observation. Many find that writing troubled thoughts before evening prayers helps clear the mind for restful sleep, as if placing the day's burdens on parchment allows the soul to rest unburdened. Brother Matthias nodded thoughtfully. "A form of contemplative practice. Yes, this has merit." Agnes wrapped the dried herbs in clean linen, providing instructions for brewing a proper infusion. As the monk departed with his remedy, Agnes reflected on how the need for peaceful sleep transcended divisions of education, wealth, and even religious belief. In the vulnerable darkness of night, everyone became equal in their desire for protection from the shadowed aspects of their own minds. As afternoon faded toward evening once more, Agnes walked to the village spring to collect fresh water. She observed the community preparing for another night, mothers hanging small sachets of protective herbs on bedposts, fathers checking that doors and windows were properly secured against both physical and spiritual intruders, grandparents telling children stories carefully selected to promote pleasant dreams. These nightly rituals, repeated in villages and towns across medieval Europe with local variations, created a rhythm to life that modern society would eventually lose. The transition from day to night was not merely marked by changing light, but by specific actions designed to ensure safe passage through the vulnerable state of sleep. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Agnes completed her own evening rituals. She placed a bowl of clean water beside her door, ostensibly for washing, but serving the dual purpose of preventing mischievous spirits from entering her dwelling. She sprinkled dried rosemary on her hearthstones as they cooled, releasing a protective aroma throughout her cottage. In homes throughout the village, similar preparations were being made. The wealthy miller's family might use more expensive ingredients, imported cinnamon rather than local herbs, beeswax candles instead of rushlights, but the essential purpose remained the same: creating a safe environment for the mysterious journey into dreams. As night deepened and the village grew quiet, Agnes sat beside her window, observing the moon rising above the forest edge. In her role as dreamkeeper, she maintained a conscious vigil during the first hours of community sleep, a practice believed to establish a protective presence over the collective dreams of her neighbors. From this quiet moment of contemplation, Agnes could sense the invisible web of sleep gradually enveloping the village. Children first, then laboring adults. Finally, the elderly whose relationship with sleep had grown more tenuous with passing years. Within this web, dreams began their nightly dance, some sweet, some troubling, some forgotten by morning, others remembered for a lifetime. The medieval understanding of dreams recognized their power over daily life in ways modern society sometimes forgets. A restful night meant productive work the following day. Shared dreams could warn of community dangers or opportunities. The boundary between waking and dreaming was seen not as absolute but permeable, requiring careful tending through rituals that acknowledged the profound influence of one realm upon the other. As the midnight hour approached, Agnes finally prepared for her own rest, trusting that her remedies and rituals would guide her toward peaceful dreams. Before closing her eyes, she whispered the traditional dreamkeeper's prayer. Guard those who sleep, comfort those who wake, guide all souls toward morning's light. The gentle rhythm of her breathing joined the collective breath of the sleeping village. A community temporarily surrendered to the mysterious realm of dreams, protected by centuries of carefully preserved wisdom about the strange ways medieval people avoided nightmares. As a cloak of stars spread across the night sky, illuminating the ancient paths between heaven and earth, one world faded and another awakened. Dreams flowed like silver streams between cottages and castles alike, carrying the sleepers to realms both wonderful and fearsome. Each mind wandered its own landscape, yet all were connected by the invisible threads of shared human experience, the universal journey from darkness to light, from fear to understanding, from one day's end to another's beginning. Let us now drift gently into the next forgotten story, where ancient whispers carry new secrets of medieval slumber, and the guardians of peaceful dreams await our arrival. On moonlit paths paved with the soft footfalls of history's quiet wisdom. In gardens kissed by silver moonlight, medieval herbalists coaxed their treasures from the earth, with hands stained green and spirits tuned to nature's whispers. They cultivated the fragrant guardians of peaceful slumber. Their ancient wisdom, carried on the night breeze, promises to lead us through dreams unmarred by darkness. In the quiet village of Willowmere, nestled between rolling hills and dense woodlands of medieval England, a small stone cottage stood apart from the others. Its walls, embraced by climbing roses and ivy tendrils, housed Elspeth, the village herbalist whose fame for dream potions had spread throughout the countryside. The year was 1348, when belief in the healing power of plants existed alongside deep-rooted superstitions about the shadow realm of nightmares. Candlelight flickered through Elspeth's windows long after the rest of the village slumbered. Inside, bundles of herbs hung from low wooden beams, their scents mingling in the warm air: lavender, chamomile, valerian, and rarer specimens collected from hidden glens. Clay pots lined rough-hewn shelves, each containing tinctures, powders, and salves prepared with methodical care throughout the seasons. On this particular evening, Elspeth worked with particular focus. Her slender fingers, worn with years of tending gardens and grinding herbs, carefully measured dried lavender into a small linen sachet. The purple blossoms had been harvested during the full moon of midsummer, when their dream-soothing properties were believed to be most potent. She hummed a gentle melody as she worked, an old tune passed down from her grandmother, who had been the herbalist before her. Throughout Willowmere and beyond, people had begun to speak of unusual nightmares. Children woke screaming. Adults found themselves unable to rest, and even the village priest had mentioned troubled sleep in his last sermon. Elspeth had been visited by more villagers in the past month than in the previous season combined, all seeking remedies for their disturbed nights. Outside her garden gate waited Thomas, a farmer whose wife had not slept soundly in weeks. He stood, patiently, hat in hand, watching the night sky with its canopy of stars. The cool autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke from distant hearths, and creatures of the night called softly from the surrounding woods. Thomas had walked 3 miles from his homestead, guided by the light of a nearly full moon, hoping Elspeth's wisdom might restore peace to his household. Elspeth tied the lavender sachet with twine, added 3 drops of rose oil, distilled from her summer blooms, and set it aside. Next came a small ceramic pot of honey infused with chamomile and lemon balm, stirred 13 times clockwise with a hawthorn twig. Each motion was deliberate, each ingredient selected with knowledge accumulated over decades of practice and observation. Medieval herbalists like Elspeth worked within a framework that modern minds might find curious, a blend of practical plant knowledge and mystical associations. They believed certain herbs gathered at particular times, handled in specific ways, could influence the invisible forces that governed dreams. The boundary between medicine and magic blurred in their craft, yet results often spoke for themselves, in the grateful faces of those who finally found peaceful rest. When Elspeth finally opened her door to Thomas, the night had deepened. Moonlight cast long shadows across her garden path, illuminating the silvery leaves of wormwood and the nodding heads of evening primrose. "You've come for Margaret," she said, her voice soft but clear. It wasn't a question. News travelled quickly, in small communities, and Elspeth made it her business to know who might need her services. Thomas nodded, explaining in hushed tones how his wife woke night after night, describing terrible visions of darkness and foreboding. "She fears to close her eyes now," he said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Our children grow frightened of her fear." Elspeth listened without interruption, noting the details of Margaret's nightmares, the timing of their onset, the themes that repeated, the foods she had eaten. All these might provide clues to the proper remedy. The medieval understanding of sleep was intimately connected to the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. An imbalance of these essential bodily fluids could manifest in troubled dreams or insomnia. "Come," Elspeth finally said, gesturing Thomas inside. "I have prepared what she needs." She gathered several items: the lavender sachet to be placed beneath Margaret's pillow, the honey mixture to be taken with warm milk before bed, and a small bundle of dried mugwort to be burned in their hearth as the family prepared for sleep. As she explained each remedy's purpose and use to Thomas, Elspeth also shared wisdom about sleep practices that had been followed for generations. "The bed should face away from the door," she instructed, "and Margaret must sleep with her head pointing north to align her body with the earth's currents. Remove all mirrors from your sleeping chamber, for they can trap wandering souls between worlds." Thomas listened attentively, committing each instruction to memory. These details might seem superstitious to modern ears, but in medieval times, they represented a holistic approach to wellness that addressed both physical comfort and spiritual protection. Sleep was understood as a vulnerable state during which the soul could wander or be influenced by unseen forces. After Thomas departed with his remedies and knowledge, Elspeth returned to her garden under the moon's gentle gaze. This space was her most precious resource, a carefully tended collection of plants arranged according to their properties and planetary associations. Medieval gardens were not merely decorative, but served as living pharmacies, organized by use and symbolic meaning. Near the stone wall grew valerian with its small pink flowers, renowned for its power to induce deep sleep. Beside it flourished lemon balm, believed to bring joy and dispel melancholy that might darken dreams. St. John's wort, harvested precisely on the feast day of its namesake saint, offered protection against night spirits according to folk wisdom. Each plant had been placed with intention, many transplanted from the wild under specific lunar phases to enhance their virtues. Elspeth moved through her garden with practiced ease, even in the dim light. Her fingers brushed against rosemary leaves, releasing their piney fragrance, a herb believed to ward off nightmares when placed beneath the pillow. She paused to check on a newly planted bed of hops, another sleep aid that had been recommended by travelling monks from a distant abbey. The medieval world understood sleep differently than we do today. Without artificial light, human rhythms followed the natural patterns of sun and moon more closely. Winter brought longer nights and extended sleep periods, often divided into first sleep and second sleep, with a peaceful waking interval between. During this midnight waking, people might pray, visit neighbors, tend to children, or simply lie in contemplative rest before returning to slumber until dawn. In her cottage, Elspeth kept careful records of her observations and remedies. Though literacy was uncommon among village women, she had been taught to read and write by the previous herbalist. Her knowledge was recorded in a bound volume of vellum pages, a treasured grimoire of sleep wisdom that combined ancient Greek medical theories, Christian prayers, and folk practices that predated both. By the light of a beeswax candle, she added notes about Thomas's visit and her prescribed remedies. Beside this entry, she sketched a small diagram of the moon's current phase, a detail considered essential for tracking treatment efficacy. Medieval herbalists observed patterns connecting lunar cycles to human sleep and dreaming, noting that certain remedies worked better during particular phases. The following morning, Elspeth was visited by Sister Agnes from the village church. The nun came not for herself, but on behalf of a young novice who had been experiencing visions during sleep that left her trembling and confused upon waking. The Mother Superior fears these may be visitations from unholy sources, Sister Agnes whispered, though her personal opinion seemed less certain. Elspeth considered this case carefully. The boundary between spiritual experiences and ordinary nightmares was often unclear in medieval thinking. Saints received divine guidance through dreams, while ordinary people might be visited by demons during vulnerable sleep hours. Determining whether a dream required medical treatment or spiritual intervention was a delicate matter. Dreams can be messages, Elspeth said thoughtfully, selecting a sprig of rosemary from a hanging bundle. But not all messages need to be heeded. Sometimes the body speaks through dreams when something is amiss. She prepared a different remedy for the novice, a wash of cool water infused with melissa and sage to bathe the face before sleeping, along with a small stone from a riverbed to be held in the hand during prayer. Physical objects played important roles in medieval sleep rituals. Stones, bones, and specially carved pieces of wood were believed to absorb negative energies or strengthen the sleeper against malevolent forces. These talismans would be carefully selected, blessed, or enchanted before being placed beneath mattresses or hung above beds. For children especially, protective amulets were common sleep aids, in an era when infant mortality loomed as a constant fear. As Sister Agnes departed with her package of remedies, the village began to stir with daily activities. Smoke rose from cooking fires, animals called from their pens, and the distant sound of the mill wheel creaking into motion marked the start of another workday. Elspeth took this time to visit her special dream garden, a circular plot behind her cottage, surrounded by a low stone wall and entered through an east-facing gate. This garden differed from her main medicinal plot. Here grew plants specifically associated with dreams and visions, night-blooming flowers like evening primrose and moonflower, sweet-scented night phlox that released its fragrance after sunset, and the mysterious mandrake with its human-like root that medieval lore claimed could cause profound visions if prepared correctly, and madness if prepared wrongly. Elspeth tended these plants with particular care, harvesting them only during certain moon phases and hours. Some were gathered at midnight, others at dawn, following traditions older than any living memory. The soil in this garden had been specially prepared with river sand to enhance drainage and mixed with powdered eggshells and bone meal for nourishment, elements believed to connect the plants to the realm of sleep and dreams. Medieval dream theory recognized different categories of night visions. Some dreams were considered merely digestive, caused by the previous day's meals or drinks unsettling the humors. Others were seen as diagnostic, revealing imbalances within the body that required treatment. The most significant were prophetic dreams, believed to contain messages from divine or mystical sources. Herbalists like Elspeth worked primarily with the first two categories, leaving the interpretation of prophetic dreams to clergy or soothsayers. By midday, Elspeth received news that the miller's son had begun sleepwalking, a condition the villagers called night wandering. The boy had been found the previous night standing beside the village well, staring into its depths while still asleep. His terrified parents had guided him back to bed, but feared what might happen should he wander toward the river or woods. For this unusual case, Elspeth prepared a special remedy. From her stores, she selected dried betony, and herbs specifically, recommended by early medieval healers for preventing night wandering. To this, she added ground amber, believed to bind the soul more firmly to the body during sleep, and a tiny amount of powdered lodestone to anchor the dreamer to his bed. These would be sewn into a small pouch and tied around the boy's ankle before sleep. She also recommended a practical measure that bridged the practical and symbolic: streams of dried beans placed across thresholds. Should the boy sleepwalk again, the beans would scatter noisily when stepped upon, alerting the household. Yet the remedy also carried symbolic weight. In folklore, evil spirits and witches were said to be compelled to stop and count any scattered objects, thus delaying them until dawn. As afternoon yielded to evening, Elspeth turned her attention to preparing dream pillows, small cushions stuffed with aromatic herbs that released sleep-inducing scents throughout the night. Unlike modern aromatherapy, which focuses primarily on scent, medieval herbalists believed that the plant essences were literally breathed into the body during sleep, carrying their healing properties directly to the brain. The most common herbs for these pillows included lavender for its calming properties, chamomile to soothe anxiety, hops to deepen sleep, and rose petals to bring pleasant dreams. For those suffering specific nightmare themes, additional elements might be added: vervain for protection against spiritual attack, dill to ward off financial worries, or thyme to dispel dreams of death or loss. Elspeth's skilled hands moved quickly as she stitched small linen cases and filled them with her custom blends. Each dream pillow was personalized to the recipient's needs, age, and constitution. Children received gentler mixtures with sweet-smelling herbs like lemon balm, while adults with severe sleep disturbances might receive stronger combinations, including valerian or even small amounts of carefully prepared poppy. The medieval understanding of sleep extended beyond remedies to the sleeping environment itself. Elspeth often advised families on bedroom arrangements to promote peaceful rest. Beds were ideally positioned away from drafts, but with proper air circulation, as the quality of night air was believed to directly influence dream content. Windows facing east would allow morning sunlight to naturally wake the sleeper, aligning human rhythms with cosmic patterns. Even the materials of the bed itself were considered important. Mattress stuffings varied by season and availability. Fresh straw in summer for coolness, wool in winter for warmth, and fragrant herbs mixed in during times of illness. Pillows might be filled with buckwheat husks, feathers, or dried herbs depending on the sleeper's needs. The wealthy might sleep on silk sheets believed to prevent night sweats and resulting fever dreams, while most used linen or wool coverings. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Elspeth's garden, she prepared her own evening meal, a simple broth with vegetables from her garden and bread baked that morning. She ate mindfully, following her own advice to avoid heavy foods before sleep. Medieval dietary wisdom connected certain foods with dream influences. Cheese was widely believed to cause nightmares, while lettuce was thought to promote gentle sleep. After her meal, Elspeth sat by her hearth and opened a leather-bound volume, one of several precious books in her possession. This particular tome contained writings attributed to Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, whose works included detailed descriptions of medicinal plants and their effects on dreams and visions. Elspeth traced the illustrated plants with her fingertip, comparing the drawings to her own observations and experiences. Medieval herbalists like Elspeth stood at the intersection of multiple knowledge traditions. The formal medical teachings descended from Greek and Roman physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, preserved and translated by Islamic scholars, emphasized the theory of humors and their influence on sleep. Monastery medicine contributed organized cultivation techniques and systematic recording of plant properties. Folk traditions provided practical applications tested over generations. All these streams flowed together in the daily practice of village healers. As darkness fully descended, Elspeth prepared for her own sleep rituals. She followed the same advice she gave to others, believing that personal practice validated professional knowledge. First came the clearing of the mind through a simple meditation, focusing on the flame of a beeswax candle while breathing deeply and regularly. Next, she drank a small cup of warm milk infused with nutmeg and honey, a gentle sleep aid used since ancient times. Her bedchamber had been arranged according to medieval sleep principles. The bed faced north-south, allowing her body to align with Earth's magnetic currents. A small bowl of water sat nearby to absorb negative energies, and sprigs of protective herbs hung from the bedposts. No mirrors faced the bed, as these were believed to trap the soul during its dream wanderings or allow unwelcome entities to enter the sleeping space. Before lying down, Elspeth performed a final ritual, tracing protective symbols above her doorway with a mixture of salt water and vervain essence. Then she placed a small iron key beneath her pillow, an ancient charm believed to lock away nightmares and unlock doors to peaceful dream realms. These actions completed, she extinguished her candle with a small prayer of gratitude for the day's healing work. Throughout the village, many others prepared for sleep using knowledge Elspeth had shared over the years. Children clutched small dream pouches containing anise seeds to ensure sweet dreams. Mothers sprinkled dried rose petals between bed linens for peaceful rest. Fathers hung protective bundles of herbs above doorways to guard the household during vulnerable sleep hours. These practices, blending practical comfort with symbolic protection, had been refined over centuries. As Elspeth drifted towards sleep, her thoughts turned to the continuity of her knowledge. She had begun training young Cecily, a quiet girl with an intuitive understanding of plants, to eventually take her place as the village herbalist. The transmission of sleep wisdom from one generation to the next was vital in a time before printed books made knowledge widely available. Each herbalist added their observations to the collective understanding, gradually refining remedies through practical experience. The medieval approach to sleep differed from our modern conceptions in fundamental ways. Sleep was not seen merely as rest, but as an altered state of consciousness during which the soul might travel beyond the body or receive messages from other realms. Protecting the sleeper meant guarding both body and spirit during this vulnerable transition. Nightmares were not merely unpleasant dreams, but potentially dangerous spiritual encounters requiring multiple levels of intervention. Dreams themselves were categorized and analyzed according to elaborate systems. A dream of flying might indicate an excess of the air element requiring grounding herbs like root vegetables in the diet. Dreams of drowning could suggest too much phlegm, treated with warming, drying herbs like ginger or cinnamon. Dreams of fire might point to excessive yellow bile, calling for cooling remedies such as cucumber or violet. These interpretations bridged medical theory and symbolic understanding in a holistic approach to wellness. While Elspeth slept beneath her herb-stuffed pillow, the medieval night continued its course. In the darkness, villagers might wake briefly between first and second sleep, a natural pattern in an era before artificial lighting extended daylight hours. During these gentle midnight wakings, people often experienced a peaceful, meditative state conducive to prayer or quiet contemplation. Some reported receiving creative insights or solutions to problems during this interval. The monastery several miles from Willowmere maintained its own sleep traditions. Monks rose for midnight prayers, the night office, breaking their sleep into segments according to the canonical hours. Their herbarium grew many of the same plants as Elspeth's garden, though their use was framed in more explicitly religious terms. Where Elspeth might speak of an herb's intrinsic properties, the monastery herbalist would attribute its healing power to divine grace working through creation. By morning light, Elspeth woke refreshed. Her dreams having been calm and restorative, she began her day by recording any significant dreams in her journal, a practice she had maintained for decades. The medieval tradition of dream recording focused on identifying patterns and connections rather than psychological analysis. Dreams of animals, changing weather, or journeys through unfamiliar landscapes were all noted for their potential significance. As she worked in her garden that morning, harvesting dew-covered herbs before the sun grew strong, Elspeth was visited by Goody Cooper, whose daughter was soon to be married. The mother sought sleep remedies of a different sort, those to ensure fertility dreams on the wedding night. Folk belief held that dreams on significant occasions could foretell future events, particularly regarding childbearing and family fortunes. For this purpose, Elspeth prepared a special mixture of herbs associated with feminine mysteries and fertility. Mugwort to enhance dream clarity, Damiana to awaken loving emotions, rose for heart opening, and jasmine for sensuality. These would be combined in a small sachet to be placed beneath the bridal pillow. Additionally, she recommended placing a bowl of water with floating rose petals beside the marriage bed, both for its gentle fragrance and its symbolic connection to feminine energy. The medieval wedding night came with its own sleep customs and superstitions. Beds were specially blessed by priests or local wise women. Protective symbols might be carved into the bedposts, and special prayers recited before the couple retired. Dream interpretation on the morning after held particular significance, with certain images, birds, fruit trees, or flowing water, considered especially fortunate omens for the marriage. As midday approached, Elspeth received word that Thomas's wife Margaret had experienced her first peaceful night's sleep in weeks. The combination of herbal remedies, bedroom rearrangement, and protective rituals had apparently succeeded where previous attempts had failed. This news brought Elspeth quiet satisfaction, the reward of an herbalist being the restored well-being of those under her care. The practice of dream healing extended beyond humans in medieval communities. Farmers sought remedies for livestock whose disturbed sleep might indicate illness or supernatural influence. Hunting dogs valued for their keen senses might receive special dream treatments to enhance their tracking abilities. Even hives of bees, considered semi-mystical creatures in medieval lore, might be treated with soothing herbs if they became agitated at night. In her garden, Elspeth continued harvesting and preparing remedies throughout the day. Each plant was acknowledged with gratitude before cutting, following an ancient tradition that recognized plants as sentient helpers rather than mere resources. Certain herbs required special handling, being cut with silver blades rather than iron, or harvested while facing particular directions. These practices connected the herbalist to generations of healers stretching back to prehistoric times. As another evening approached, Elspeth prepared for a different type of dream work. The village midwife had requested her assistance with a woman approaching childbirth who had been frightened by prophetic dreams of difficulty. For this delicate situation, Elspeth would create a dream altar, a small arrangement of objects, plants, and symbols intended to influence the pregnant woman's dream state toward positive outcomes. The dream altar included elements representing safe passage, smooth river stones, feathers from messenger birds, bridges fashioned from small twigs. Among these were placed calming herbs like chamomile and motherwort, along with protective plants such as rowan berries. A small candle would be lit each night until the birth, its flame symbolizing the light, guiding both mother and child safely. Through the transition, medieval birth practices incorporated numerous sleep and dream elements. Women approaching labor were encouraged to record their dreams for signs of the baby's sex or temperament. Certain dreams were considered encouraging. Dreams of water, open doors, or ripening fruit suggested easy delivery. Dreams of barriers, darkness, or being lost might indicate challenges requiring additional spiritual or herbal interventions. As Elspeth carefully assembled the elements for the birth dream altar, she reflected on how deeply sleep wisdom was woven into every significant life transition in medieval society. From childhood night terrors to elder insomnia, from wedding nights to final restful passage, herbs and rituals provided continuity and comfort through life's vulnerable moments. The traditional knowledge Elspeth practiced had survived centuries of cultural change, including the tension between pagan plant wisdom and Christian doctrine. Many sleep herbs once associated with pre-Christian deities had been rededicated to saints or the Virgin Mary, allowing their use to continue within the framework of medieval Christianity. St. John's wort, for example, named for its blooming, around the feast of St. John the Baptist, carried older associations with solstice celebrations and sun worship. Night fell once more over Willowmere, bringing with it the mystery of sleep that had fascinated humans throughout recorded history. In cottages and manors alike, people performed their evening rituals, clearing hearth ashes, believed to harbour nightmare spirits if left overnight, securing doors and windows against literal and spiritual intruders, and preparing their minds and bodies for the vulnerability of sleep. Elspeth made her final rounds through her dream garden, checking plants by moonlight and whispering encouragement to seedlings. Medieval gardeners commonly spoke to their plants, believing that human attention and intention influenced growing things. For dream plants especially, the herbalist's consciousness was thought to affect the plant's potency. Elspeth's decades of mindful cultivation had created a garden of remarkable vibrancy, each plant seemingly eager to offer its unique gifts. Before returning indoors, she gathered a handful of night-blooming flowers whose scent grew stronger after sunset. These would be placed in water beside her bed, their fragrance influencing her dreams through the subtle pathways of scent memory. The medieval understanding of aromatherapy recognized that odors bypass conscious thought, speaking directly to older brain structures associated with emotion and memory. Knowledge arrived at through observation rather than anatomical understanding. Inside her cottage, Elspeth reviewed her notes by candlelight, adding observations about which remedies had proven effective for particular sleep disturbances. This careful record-keeping allowed medieval herbalists to refine their practice over time, gradually distinguishing between coincidence and causation through repeated trials. Though lacking modern scientific methodology, their empirical approach, nonetheless, built a substantial body of practical knowledge. Among her records, Elspeth kept a special section devoted to seasonal sleep patterns. Medieval people were acutely aware of how sleep changed throughout the year. Winter bringing longer, deeper sleep often accompanied by more vivid dreaming. Summer offering lighter, shorter rest periods. Remedies were adjusted accordingly, with winter sleep aids focusing on warmth and comfort, while summer preparations emphasized cooling and calming properties. As another day came to its close, Elspeth prepared a batch of dream tea for her own use, a blend of chamomile, linden flowers, and a touch of honey. While the water heated, she reflected on the continuous cycle of sleep wisdom, passing from one generation to the next, each herbalist adding their observations to the collective knowledge. What had begun in prehistoric experimentation had evolved through Greek medical theory, monastic preservation, and folk innovation into the sophisticated practice she now maintained. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more villagers with disturbed sleep, more remedies to prepare, more gardens to tend. But for now, as the moon sailed among scattered clouds and nightbirds called from the forest edge, Elspeth could rest knowing she had done her part to keep nightmares at bay and guard her community's vulnerable sleeping hours. In her small corner of the medieval world, ancient wisdom continued to provide comfort against the darkness of troubled dreams. As the fragrant steam from her tea rose like prayers into the quiet night, Elspeth whispered a traditional herbalist's blessing. May all who sleep find peace, may all who dream find wisdom, may all who wake find joy. With these words, another day in the life of a medieval dream healer came to its gentle close, adding one more small thread to the tapestry of human understanding about the mysterious realm of sleep. Another chapter awaits like morning mist rising from ancient stones, where dreamers once carved symbols into the very earth to guard their slumbering minds. Ancient symbols etched in silver and stone, carried through centuries on whispered prayers, dream talismans of medieval nights, where villagers sought peaceful slumber beneath star-scattered heavens. Their secrets drift to us now like petals on a twilight breeze, stories waiting to unfold in the gentle cradle of night. In the misty valleys, of 12th century Burgundy, where morning fog clung to stone cottages and ancient oak trees stood sentinel over generations of dreamers, there existed a subtle art now lost to modern memory. The crafting of dream talismans, small, humble objects invested with the power to guide one's night journeys, was neither grand sorcery nor mere superstition, but rather a delicate balance between faith, folk wisdom, and the intuitive understanding of the sleeping mind. The village of Willowmead nestled against rolling hills that sloped toward distant mountains. Here lived Elsbeth, a woman of middle years with silver-streaked auburn hair and hands worn smooth from decades of careful work. Neither witch nor healer in any formal capacity, Elsbeth had nonetheless earned quiet respect for her understanding of dreams and the crafting of objects to soothe troubled sleepers. The villagers came to her not with grand ailments, but with whispers of night terrors, recurring dreams of loss, or the peculiar sleeplessness that sometimes follows great change. Her small cottage sat at the edge of the village, surrounded by a garden where common herbs mingled with plants of more mysterious purpose. Lavender and valerian grew in neat rows, their scent carrying across the garden on even the gentlest breeze. Beyond them grew less familiar specimens. Moonflowers that opened only under starlight, strange purple-veined leaves from distant lands, and delicate white blossoms said to have grown from tears shed by angels. Inside, Elsbeth's home was a testament to ordered simplicity. Bundles of dried herbs hung from ceiling beams, filling the air with layered fragrances that changed subtly with the seasons. A well-worn table near the hearth served as her workspace, where small tools lay in careful arrangement. Silver needles, tiny knives with handles of polished wood, spools of thread dyed in colours ranging from pale moon white to the deep indigo of twilight skies. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of seeds, powders, and dried petals, each labelled in Elsbeth's careful hand. Interspersed among these were the raw materials of her craft: smooth river stones, pieces of wood aged by water and time, scraps of leather, fragments of bone, and occasionally precious metals gifted by grateful villagers, tiny scraps of silver, or copper that she would transform into objects of comfort and protection. It was on a cool autumn evening when young Thomas, the blacksmith's son, appeared at her door. A boy of no more than 12 winters, with serious eyes and a thoughtful demeanour unusual for his age. He stood in her doorway, cap clutched in hand, gaze fixed on the packed earth of her threshold. "Good eve to you, Thomas," Elsbeth said, her voice as gentle as leaves settling on still water. "What brings you to my door as the day fades?" "The dreams, mistress," Thomas replied, his voice barely carrying above the evening birdsong. "They come every night now, and I cannot rest proper." Elsbeth nodded, stepping aside to welcome him into the warmth of her home. She gestured toward a simple stool near the fire, and the boy sat perched at its edge like a sparrow ready for flight. "Tell me of these dreams," she said, settling across from him. She did not press when he remained silent, only waited with the patience of one who understands that dreams, like night-blooming flowers, unfold in their own time. "I dream of water," Thomas finally said. "Deep water that rises around me, not like the mill pond or even the river after spring rains. Deeper, darker water that has no bottom, and voices calling from beneath." He looked up, meeting her eyes, for the first time. "My mother says it's foolishness, that I should pray more fervently before sleep. Father says it's because I'm growing and need more bread at supper, but the dreams come all the same." Elsbeth listened, noting the tension in the boy's shoulders, the shadow of fatigue beneath his eyes. In her experience, dreams of deep water often spoke of emotions too vast for waking thoughts to contain, especially in the young who had not yet learned to navigate the currents of their inner lives. Dreams speak in their own tongue, Thomas. Not better or worse than prayers or bread, just different. She rose and moved to her shelves, fingers skimming over various containers before selecting one carved from pale wood. From it, she extracted a smooth stone the color of dawn sky, with a natural hole worn through its center. This stone was once whole until water and time worked together to create this passage, she explained, holding it to the firelight so Thomas could see how the flame glowed through the opening. The old ones believed such stones allow us to see between worlds, the waking world and the dream world. They called them hagstones, though there is nothing of witchcraft about them. They are simply nature's own talismans. She returned to her work table, motioning for Thomas to join her. From a small pouch, she withdrew 3 slender reeds, dried but still flexible, and began to weave them into a simple circular form around the stone. Dreams of water need anchoring, she explained as her fingers worked. Something to remind the dreaming mind that there is always solid ground, even in the deepest currents. She reached for a small bowl containing what appeared to be fine sand glittering with tiny fragments of shell and stone. This comes from the riverbank where water meets earth. I gather it only when the moon is waning, for that is when waters recede and reveal what lies beneath. With practiced movements, Elsbeth applied a thin layer of beeswax to parts of the reed frame, then carefully dusted it with the sand mixture. Next, she selected several strands of thread, one blue as twilight, one brown as fertile soil, and one silver as moonlight on water. The threads bind the elements together, Thomas. Blue for the water of your dreams, that you may move through it without fear. Brown for earth, to remind your sleeping self of solid ground waiting below. And silver to guide you like moonlight reflecting on dark waters. As she worked, weaving the threads around the frame and through the hole in the stone, her voice grew, softer, taking on a rhythmic quality that seemed to blend with the crackling of the fire and the distant calling of night birds. In medieval times, she said, people understood that dreams were journeys of the soul, not merely the mind playing tricks, as some learned men now claim, but travels through realms unseen by waking eyes. Our ancestors knew to prepare for these journeys as carefully as they might prepare for any important travel. Thomas watched, transfixed, as the simple objects transformed under her hands into something that seemed to hold meaning beyond its humble materials. The talisman itself holds no magic, Elsbeth continued, her voice dropping further so that Thomas had to lean closer to hear. Its power comes from the intention set into its making, and from your belief in its purpose. It is a bridge between what you know when awake and what you experience when dreaming. She worked a final knot with the silver thread, then held the finished piece up to the firelight. The hagstone swung gently at the center of the circular frame, catching and reflecting the warm light, while the sand particles embedded in the wax glittered like distant stars. 3 nights it must hang above your sleeping place, she instructed, placing the talisman in Thomas's palm and folding his fingers over it. Each night before you close your eyes, look through the stone's opening and say these words: water below, earth beneath, sky above. I walk between worlds on paths of light. Can you remember that? Thomas nodded solemnly, repeating the words until Elsbeth was satisfied with his recitation. After 3 nights, wear it against your skin when you sleep. The dreams will not cease entirely. Dreams never do, for they have their purpose. but you will find yourself standing on solid ground, even in the deepest waters, and the voices from below will become clear enough to understand. As Thomas departed, clutching his talisman with careful reverence, Elsbeth watched him navigate the twilight path back toward the village centre. She knew the boy would return, perhaps in a fortnight, to tell her of changed dreams, how the endless water had revealed islands, or how the voices had formed into comprehensible words. Such was the pattern with dream talismans. They did not banish night visions, but transformed them from sources of fear to portals of understanding. This knowledge, the crafting of dream talismans, had come to Elsbeth not from books or formal teaching, but through lineage. Her grandmother, a quiet woman with eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible world, had begun her instruction when Elsbeth was younger than Thomas. The learning continued with her mother, who specialized in talismans for travelers, designed to prevent the disorienting dreams that often accompany sleep in unfamiliar places. Throughout medieval Europe, such knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation, primarily through women, though not exclusively so. In some regions, monasteries preserved similar practices, their carefully illuminated manuscripts depicting symbols and materials believed to influence dream states. Monks created elaborate prayer beads with specific patterns meant to be contemplated before sleep, guiding the mind toward peaceful visions of saints and angels rather than demons or lost souls. In noble households, more elaborate talismans might incorporate precious materials, silver inscribed with prayers, small gemstones believed to resonate with celestial energies, or rare herbs brought by traders from distant lands. Yet the essential principles remained consistent across social boundaries. The creation of a focal point for intention, the incorporation of elements symbolizing balance, and words or symbols linking the object to its purpose. As autumn deepened, into winter, more villagers found their way to Elsbeth's door. The harvest had been completed. The fields lay fallow under increasingly frosted mornings, and the longer nights brought with them more time for dreaming, and consequently, more troubled sleep for some. Old Willem, whose joints ached with the memory of decades working the fields, came seeking relief from dreams of being buried beneath the very soil he had tended all his life. For him, Elsbeth created a talisman incorporating a feather from a high-soaring hawk, symbolizing freedom and the vast open sky. "Hold this as you fall asleep," she instructed the weathered farmer. "Feel its lightness against your palm and remember that even the heaviest earth cannot contain the spirit that dreams." Young Agnes, newly betrothed and anxious about her approaching marriage to a man from a neighboring village, suffered dreams of losing her way in endless forests, where paths disappeared beneath her feet. Her talisman included threads carefully unwound from her mother's wedding cloth, woven around a small iron compass star that Elsbeth traded 4 hen's eggs to obtain from a travelling tinker. "The thread connects you to your origins," Elsbeth explained, "while the star reminds your dreaming self that direction exists even when paths cannot be seen." Each talisman was unique to its recipient's needs, yet all shared common elements rooted in medieval understanding of dream symbolism. The circular form represented the cyclical nature of time and the wholeness of the dreamer. Materials from the natural world, stone, wood, feather, bone, connected the sleeper to the physical reality that awaited their return from dream journeys. Threads or cords bound these elements together just as the dream experience connected different aspects of the dreamer's life and concerns. Some regional differences existed in these practices. In coastal villages, talismans often incorporated shells believed to contain the sound of the sea's rhythm, thought to guide dreams toward a natural tide-like pattern of rising and falling, rather than chaotic surges. In mountain communities, Small crystals formed the basis of many dream objects, their clarity associated with the sharp, clean air of high elevations and the perspective that comes with distance. By midwinter, when the longest night cast the village into extended darkness, and families gathered close to hearthfires, Elsbeth received an unusual visitor. Brother Marcus, a herbalist from the monastery half a day's journey away, appeared at her doorstep as afternoon light waned toward evening. Their relationship was one of cautious, mutual respect. The church officially disapproved of folk practices that might be deemed superstitious or worse, pagan in origin. Yet many individual clergy, particularly those who worked closely with plants and healing, recognized valuable knowledge when they encountered it, regardless of its source. Sister Elsbeth, he greeted her, using the honorary title that acknowledged her unmarried status rather than any religious affiliation. I hope the Lord's peace finds you well in these cold days. And you, Brother Marcus, she replied, welcoming him inside. What brings you through the forest as night approaches? The monk hesitated, glancing around her cottage with interest rather than the suspicion some might expect. His eyes lingered on her orderly shelves, noting the careful arrangement of her materials. We have a novice, he finally said, a young man of great promise in scholarship, yet he is troubled by dreams that leave him exhausted. Dreams of ancient texts whose words rearrange themselves before he can read their meaning. The abbot has prescribed additional prayers and fasting, but he trailed off, his weathered hands, adjusting the simple wooden cross hanging at his waist. But the dreams persist, Elsbeth finished for him. Indeed, and having benefited from your knowledge of herbs in the past, I wondered if your understanding might extend to this more delicate matter. Elsbeth considered carefully before responding. Assisting a member of the monastic community required particular discretion. Dream talismans walked a fine line between accepted devotional objects and practices the church might consider questionable. I believe I can create something suitable, she said, after a thoughtful pause. Something that would complement rather than replace the abbot's spiritual guidance. Relief softened the monk's features. I had hoped you might say so. The novice shows such promise. It would be a loss to the scriptorium if his studies were to suffer. For this special case, Elsbeth selected materials with particular care. From a small cedar box, she retrieved a piece of vellum no larger than her palm, a corner fragment from a damaged manuscript that Brother Marcus himself had given her years earlier when it could no longer be used for its original purpose. The foundation will be that which already knows the shape of words, she explained, cutting the vellum into a precise circle. From another container, she extracted 3 tiny ink pots, one containing black ink made from oak galls such as scribes used, one holding red ochre mixed with egg white, and the third containing a blue pigment derived from crushed lapis, precious, and rarely seen in their rural community. With a slender brush crafted from 3 hairs of a winter hare, she began to inscribe the vellum with concentric circles of text. The outermost ring she wrote in black, forming letters from the Latin alphabet, arranged not into words, but in a pattern that created perfect symmetry when the circle was complete. The middle ring she inscribed in red with symbols representing the classical elements, earth, air, fire, water, arranged to indicate their natural balance and transformation. The innermost circle, written in the precious blue, contained a single word. Interlego, I understand. The dreaming mind often seeks to solve what the waking mind has set aside, Elsbeth explained as she worked. For a scholar, the frustration comes not from fearsome visions, but from the tantalizing promise of knowledge that remains just beyond reach. Brother Marcus watched with scholarly interest, noting the precision of her script despite her lack of formal training. "This talisman does not presume to grant understanding," she continued, "but rather to remind the dreaming mind of its connection to the waking intellect. The patterns of letters create an orderly space where meaning can settle rather than shift like sand underwater." When the ink had dried, she pierced the top of the vellum circle with a silver needle, then threaded it with a cord woven from undyed wool and strands of flax. To this, she added 3 small objects: a smooth black stone from the riverbed, a tiny bundle of rosemary bound with red thread, and a sliver of wood from an oak struck by lightning, but which had survived and continued to grow. The stone anchors the mind when thoughts would scatter. Rosemary strengthens memory, allowing the dreamer to carry insights back across the threshold of waking. And the oak reminds us that illumination comes suddenly sometimes, yet wisdom grows slowly thereafter. She tied off the cord, creating a pendant that could be worn against the skin beneath clothing. Brother Marcus accepted the finished talisman with appropriate solemnity. How should the novice use this? It should be placed beneath his pillow for 3 nights while he contemplates its design before sleeping. After that, it may be worn about the neck, though hidden from casual view. The dreams of scattered text will continue for a time, but gradually, the words will remain still long enough to be read before transforming. As the monk prepared to leave, he hesitated. "There is nothing in this that contradicts the teachings of Holy Mother Church." Elsbeth smiled gently. "The materials are of God's creation, Brother Marcus. The intentions are for clarity of thought and peaceful rest. The symbols honor order and understanding. I have included nothing of summoning or influence over others, nothing that seeks power beyond the proper ordering of one's own mind." Satisfied, the monk nodded and took his leave, the carefully wrapped talisman tucked safely within his robes. The relationship between dream talismans and the medieval church remained complex throughout the period. Official doctrine increasingly distinguished between approved devotional objects, crucifixes, prayer beads, or medallions bearing saints' images, and superstitious items believed to hold inherent powers. Yet in practice, the line often blurred. Prayers might be inscribed on pendants worn during sleep. Holy water might be sprinkled on bedding to ensure peaceful dreams. Saints particularly associated with sleep or visions, such as Saint Dymphna or Saint Christopher, might be invoked through specific rituals before bedtime. In noble households, this intersection of formal religion and folk practice often manifested in elaborately decorated prayer books containing special devotions to be read before sleep. Some such books featured illuminated borders showing protective symbols, interwoven knots that demons supposedly could not untangle, or patterns of flowers associated with peaceful rest. As winter slowly yielded to early spring, Thomas returned to Elsbeth's cottage. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded, and he moved with the greater confidence of one who has faced a fear and found it lessened. "The water is still there," he reported, sitting once more by her hearth. "But now I can see through it all the way to the bottom, and there are stepping stones beneath the surface." "And the voices?" Elsbeth asked, stirring a pot of simple stew that would be their shared supper. "They're singing, not calling," the boy said with mild surprise, as though just realizing this himself. "I still don't understand the words, but the sound is not frightening anymore." This was the true purpose of dream talismans in medieval understanding. Not to eliminate the dream experience, which was viewed as necessary for spiritual and mental health, but to transform the dreamer's relationship to it. Dreams were considered messages, whether from the divine, from aspects of the self, or sometimes from departed loved ones. Learning to interpret rather than fear these messages constituted an important part of medieval dream lore. Elsbeth had been teaching Thomas the rudiments of dream interpretation over the winter months. The boy showed a natural aptitude for recognizing patterns and symbols, and an unusual patience for one so young. Dreams of water, she explained as they shared their simple meal, often speak of feelings that run deeper than daily thoughts. The stepping stones suggest you're finding ways to navigate these depths. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. My father has been teaching me smithing. The first time the hot metal hissed in the cooling barrel, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Now I watch for the steam and listen to what it tells me about the temperature. That may well be connected, Elsbeth agreed. Learning to read the signs of your craft during the day and learning to read the symbols of your dreams at night. Both require the same quality of attention. As they talked, Elsbeth worked on a new talisman, this one commissioned by the miller's wife, who suffered dreams of being crushed beneath the great stones of the mill. For this, she selected lightweight materials, dried reeds, cloth dyed with saffron to represent the golden grain that passed through the mill, and tiny feathers from a wren's abandoned nest. Will you teach me to make them? Thomas asked abruptly, watching her hands with keen interest. The question gave Elsbeth pause. Traditionally, such knowledge passed through family lines, yet she had no children of her own, and Thomas showed both interest and the right temperament for such work. It is not merely a matter of the hands, she said carefully. To create effective talismans requires understanding the person for whom it is made. You must learn to listen not just to what they say about their dreams, but to what remains unspoken. I could learn that, Thomas insisted. I already know when my little sister is afraid, even when she pretends not to be. I can tell by how she holds her shoulders. Elsbeth smiled at this evidence of observational skill. Perhaps you could at that. We might begin with the simplest techniques when you've seen 13 winters. For now, you can help me gather materials, if your parents permit it. This pattern of knowledge transmission, informal apprenticeship beginning with collecting and preparing materials, typically occurred within families, but occasionally extended to non-relatives who showed particular aptitude. The craft of dream talismans, like many medieval specialized practices, relied on direct observation and hands-on learning rather than written instruction. As spring advanced, bringing longer days and the first tentative blossoms to Elsbeth's garden, the nature of village dreams shifted with the season. Winter's dreams often featured images of scarcity, isolation, or being trapped. Understandable fears in a time when harsh weather could indeed mean life or death. Spring dreams, by contrast, frequently involved transformation, renewal, and occasionally visitations. Young married women dreamed of children yet to be born. Farmers dreamed of fields yielding impossible abundance, and many villagers reported dreams of deceased family members appearing with messages or simply sitting quietly beside their sleeping forms. This seasonal pattern influenced Elsbeth's selection of materials. Winter talismans incorporated elements that provided assurance of continuity and survival. Evergreen sprigs, stones from the hearth foundation, iron from the smith's forge. Spring talismans featured materials representing growth and possibility. Newly sprouted seeds preserved in clear tree resin, fibrous roots arranged in spiral patterns, the first flower petals pressed and dried. One unusually warm day as wildflowers began to carpet the forest edges, the Lady Adela, wife of the region's minor lord, sent her personal maid to Elsbeth's cottage. The request was delivered with nervous formality. The lady experienced disturbing dreams and requested Elsbeth's attendance at the manor house before sunset. Such summonses were rare, but not unprecedented. Even nobility, with access to learned, physicians and occasionally their own chaplains, sometimes sought help from those with specialized local knowledge. Elsbeth gathered her smaller work basket, containing the most portable of her supplies, and followed the maid along the winding path that led to the stone manor house overlooking the village. The Lady Adela received her not in the great hall, but in her private chamber, a sign of both discretion and respect. Though younger than Elsbeth by perhaps a decade, the noblewoman's face showed the strain of sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming," Lady Adela said, dismissing her maid with a gentle gesture. When they were alone, she continued, "I understand. You have knowledge of troublesome dreams and their remedies." "I have some experience in that area, my lady," Elsbeth acknowledged with appropriate modesty. "My husband believes I need merely pray more diligently before sleep," Lady Adela said, a faint edge of frustration in her otherwise composed voice. "The chaplain has blessed my bedchamber and prescribed specific devotions. Yet still these dreams persist." Elsbeth waited patiently as the noblewoman gathered her thoughts. "I dream of a child," Lady Adela finally said, her voice dropping to near whisper. "A girl child with hair like summer wheat and eyes as green as new leaves. She stands at the edge of our orchard, never approaching, never speaking. She simply watches me with those eyes that seem to hold questions I cannot answer." The lady's hands, adorned with two simple silver rings, clutched at the embroidered edge of her outer garment. "We have been blessed with 2 sons, healthy and strong. There is no daughter, lost or otherwise. Yet this dream child appears night after night until I fear to close my eyes." Elsbeth considered carefully before responding. Dreams of unknown children often carried significant meaning in medieval dream interpretation. They might represent unrealized potential, spiritual calling, or occasionally premonition. "How do you feel in her presence?" she asked. "Fear, sadness, longing." "That is the strangest part," Lady Adela replied. "I feel recognition, as though I should know her, and a sort of expectation, as if she waits for me to remember something important. For this unique situation, Elsbeth would need to create a talisman that aided communication rather than banishment, a bridge between the dreamer and the dream figure. With your permission, my lady, I would gather materials from your own surroundings for this purpose. A few leaves from your orchard trees, perhaps a thread from your own needlework. Objects that belong to your daily life may help create clearer understanding in your dream world." Lady Adela agreed readily, instructing servants to allow Elsbeth access to the manor's small orchard. There, Elsbeth carefully selected not the perfect leaves, but those that showed character, one with a small hole through which light could pass, another that had healed from some minor damage, curving in an unusual pattern. Returning to the lady's chamber, she requested and received a length of blue thread from Lady Adela's embroidery basket. Thread the noblewoman confirmed she had used recently in creating a tapestry depicting the local landscape. Working at a small table near the window to capture the last of the daylight, Elsbeth created a talisman unlike her usual designs. The foundation was a small square of linen, upon which she arranged the orchard leaves in a pattern suggesting an open gateway. The blue thread she used to stitch the leaves in place, but also to create a spiraling path that wound from the edge of the fabric to its center. "The leaves form a doorway between worlds," she explained as she worked. "The spiral path creates a safe approach for the dream child, should she choose to come closer." When complete, this should be placed beneath your pillow, my lady, with the intent not to banish the child from your dreams, but to invite clearer communication. You believe I should speak with this vision? Lady Adela asked, uncertainty clear in her voice. Dreams that persist despite prayer and blessing often carry messages our waking minds have overlooked, Elspeth said carefully. This child may represent something seeking expression in your life. By acknowledging her presence and opening yourself to understanding, the dream may transform or even resolve itself naturally. From her basket, she selected a small piece of green aventurine stone, polished smooth by the river. This she attached at the center of the spiral with 3 careful stitches. This stone represents the heart of the matter, she explained. Its color echoes the child's eyes in your description. In your dream, focus your thoughts on this stone and simply ask, "What would you have me know?" When the talisman was complete, Elspeth provided additional instructions for its use, emphasizing that dream communication required openness rather than fear. Lady Adela accepted the finished piece with a mixture of trepidation and hope, pressing a silver coin into Elspeth's hand, despite her protests that such payment was unnecessary. A fortnight later, as Elspeth worked in her garden under the strengthening spring sun, a manor servant delivered a small package wrapped in fine linen. Inside lay a delicately carved wooden pendant in the shape of a perfect leaf, along with a brief note in Lady Adela's elegant hand. The child spoke. "She is coming at midsummer. My dreams are peaceful now. My gratitude always." Whether the dream had indeed been premonition of a daughter soon to join the family, or whether the talisman had simply allowed Lady Adela to connect with her own deep desire for a daughter, Elspeth could not know with certainty. In medieval understanding, the line between prophetic dreams and the expression of subconscious wishes remained fluid and mysterious. As spring yielded to early summer, the village prepared for the celebration of Midsummer's Eve, a time when, according to ancient belief, the veil between worlds grew thin. Dreams during this period were considered especially significant, sometimes containing glimpses of future spouses, warnings of coming challenges, or visitations from protective spirits. In preparation for this important dream season, many villagers sought Elspeth's help creating or renewing protective talismans. Young unmarried women particularly hoped for dreams revealing their future partners, while parents requested talismans to ensure their children's peaceful sleep during the spiritually charged night. Elspeth worked tirelessly in the days leading up to the celebration, her table covered with materials specific to midsummer. St. John's wort gathered at dawn, small pouches of dried mugwort, the herb most associated with prophetic dreaming, and ribbons in the traditional midsummer colors of red, white, and green. Thomas continued his informal apprenticeship, now trusted to gather certain materials and even to prepare the simplest bases for talismans, the wooden discs, leather squares, or reed circles that would later receive more specialized additions. "Why do people dream more vividly at midsummer?" he asked one afternoon as they worked together in the lengthening daylight. "Some say it's because the sun lingers so long in the sky that its light remains caught in our minds even after darkness falls," Elspeth replied. "Others believe the abundance of growing things, plants reaching their fullest expression, affects our sleeping thoughts just as surely as spring water affects the body." She handed him a bundle of thin hazel twigs to sort by size. "The old stories tell us that on Midsummer's Eve, the fairy folk walk more freely in our world, and perhaps we walk more easily in theirs through our dreams." Thomas's expression revealed healthy skepticism at this explanation. causing Elsbeth to smile. Whether one believes in fairy folk or not, there is certain truth that our dreams respond to the world around us. The extended daylight, the warmth, the abundance of summer, all these influence how we sleep and what we experience in dreams. This seasonal approach to dream interpretation formed a central aspect of medieval dream lore. Winter dreams often focused on survival, spring dreams on renewal and growth, summer dreams on abundance and connection, while autumn dreams frequently dealt with preparation and transition. Dream talismans created for each season incorporated appropriate symbolism and materials to harmonize with these natural cycles. On Midsummer's Eve itself, Elsbeth did not participate in the village festivities around the communal bonfire. Instead, she performed her own quiet ritual, walking the boundary of her garden in the deep twilight, placing small dream talismans at each corner. These were not for human use, but for the garden itself. Simple arrangements of stone, twig, and thread that represented her gratitude for the plants that made her work possible. As summer progressed toward autumn, the cycle of seasonal dreams continued its ancient pattern. The villagers brought their night visions to Elsbeth, and she crafted talismans suited to each person's needs. Thomas continued to learn, showing increasing skill in both the crafting of objects and the careful listening required to understand the dreamer's true concerns. The practice of dream talismans, like many medieval folk traditions, eventually faced challenges from multiple directions. The church grew increasingly suspicious of practices that seemed to attribute power to objects rather than to God alone. The rise of universities and formal medical training led to dream interpretations based more on physical causes, imbalanced, humors, or digestive disturbances, than on symbolic meaning. Yet in villages like Willowmead, the ancient knowledge persisted, adapting as necessary to avoid conflict with religious authorities while preserving its essential purpose: helping ordinary people find meaning and peace in the mysterious realm of dreams. Practitioners like Elsbeth continued their work quietly, their talismans evolving to incorporate Christian symbols alongside older motifs, their explanations carefully framed in terms acceptable to local clergy. The human need to understand and navigate dreams remained constant through changing times. Whether through elaborately crafted noble talismans with precious materials, or humble village objects made from river stones and garden herbs, medieval people sought to create bridges between their waking and dreaming lives, to find meaning in night visions and to ensure peaceful rest in troubled times. In this quiet, persistent tradition, we can recognize our own continuing fascination with dreams and the various methods we still employ, from dream journals to modern sleep aids, to better understand what happens when we close our eyes and journey into the landscape of sleep. The specific forms may have changed, but the essential human desire remains to find peace in our sleeping hours, and perhaps, if we are fortunate, to bring back wisdom from that other world that awaits us each night. A soft thank you to you, the listener. And if you're new here, we'd love to have you subscribe so you never miss a story. Let these ancient dream practices carry you into your own peaceful slumber, where perhaps you'll discover talismans of your very own making, waiting in the gentle darkness of night.